honeydews, and welcome back to Sippin N Bitchin. We are on episode 6, part 2, and we're your main bitches. I didn't know if I was going to say her names.
That's fine. She's Sam. Stuff. We're diving right back in case you think we're wearing the same outfits, because we're recording this in a one sitting. It's all good. But we left off the end of chapter 8, where she's feeling like more because Niktos just had everybody in the room saying like, yes, they ain't gonna help you no more. So we're going into chapter 9. Orphine had led Sarah off the die through the war room and into the narrow corridor that led to the east wing and Niktos' office. Then left me standing in a shadowy alcove, still dazed by Niktos' actions. And so then she meets up with Nektis, and there's this interaction with them where Nektis still lets Sarah hold Jadis despite everything. And Nektis goes, "What you did to Ash was an accident. One I don't fear you repeating with my daughter." And I think it's the realization and the I don't want to say common sense, but like the fact that he can see that clearly she didn't mean to do it, and like she's feeling bad, but like he still trusts her with his daughter. Like that's a big deal, even though she's a Draken. Like, come on, dude.
It's a big deal.
And so then she asks Nektis, "Are you now tasked with watching over me until Niktos or someone else is available?" And Nektis goes, "I'm here because I chose to be." And she goes, "You don't have to lie." And Nektis cocked his head. He appeared relaxed as he spoke, but an undercurrent of energy brimmed beneath his flesh. Why would I lie about something like that? And I think the realization of like the embodiment of everyone who is following these like even like Cass, like Kieran and all his people and whatever. This is a great illustration of like they're choosing to do things. I mean, it varies depending on the situation. Like some of them they're like told, "Hey, like watch her XYZ thing," but this is a great illustration of Nectus just being like, "I choose to be here," kind of vibe.
Yeah.
So Sarah's, bonding with Jadis, and she gets Jadis to eat off of a utensil, which is a big deal. And then they have a short discussion on Jadis's mom, and Nektis kind of gives some background about how Sarah, like, kind of looks like her mom. So, like, she could kind of associate it with that. And we learn that Jadis's mom's name is Halea. I'm going to say Halea. She had hair like yours, not as pale, but close. I don't think Jadis remembers much about her. She's still too young, but how can we ever be sure what a child remembers and what doesn't? And he tells Sarah that they were mated. It's the same as marriage in many ways. It is not something we Draken enter in lightly. The bonds we forge together in a mating can only be broken by death. And
beautiful.
Then they kind of talk about heartmates, which we all know about that already. And I think this is another discussion in terms of like death is inevitable. She's really set on there only being this one option in which she dies. And then they're talking about kind of like getting the embers removed and that whole plan. And I think this is a beautiful realization of how he's Niktos. I mean, he's already been doing this, but how everyone is starting to separate the embers from who Sarah is. Like, yes, the embers are important, but I think we're starting to recognize how they're two different entities. Both need to be preserved and both need to be saved.
Yeah. Which we love.
And so then Nectus is giving background of how when ethos was the true primal of life and ascended the chosen, they became the same as godlings because of the ether being stronger in thirdborns. None had ever ascended into an actual god, not even the 100 years of being chosen. Of the chosen being ascended, I cannot read, but none had primal embers in them either. Anything is possible with you. Another instance of we don't know what the heck is going to happen with these women and these things. And then they're talking about, as Penelope said, the gods of divination called Mount Lotho home. Kind of talking about Delphi and how he is still alive and how we can find him. And Nectus says the pools of Divinash is how they can find him. It's been relocated to the Vale where Nyktos cannot go, but also where Colas cannot go. So Nectus and Sarah are gonna go together and travel, but they have to wait until after the coronation.
Gotta be
And
safe.
essentially they end this chapter with the embers belonging to Nyktos because the primal of life was his destiny, and Nyktos goes, if this works, it will be mine again. And I just love it. And so Sarah, we go into chapter 10, Sarah telling Nyktos that Nyktos said that she looks similar to Jadis. And we learn background of how Colas killed Jadis's mom, which is truly tragic. And I think this is one of those like spite what is it? Something spite your face. Cut your nose to spite your face. What's the saying? There's a saying. Anyway.
I don't know that saying if there's a
Anyway, Colas loathes Nectus. He wanted him to pay for being loyal to Nyktos' father, and then Nyktos, since he believes that Nectus should have been honored to serve him after he became the primal of life. Good on you, Nectus, for not serving a dumbass duker. And then Nyktos tells Sarah that Nectus was the first to become a Draken. He was the Draken who gave his fires to the flesh my father lent to create the first mortal. And so she asks if they're immortal, and Nyktos says, not even a primal is immortal, Sarah. Nothing that can be killed truly is, no matter how long we live. And she says, is there anything immortal? And he says, the array. And before you ask, I don't know how old your Holland is, and I had been about to ask that, lol. The victors are also immortal, but in a different way. And I guess if you are reincarnated over and over and over again, like that is a version of immortality.
Yeah.
So then they're talking about like the future, like after the embers, and they're talking about keeping the right if all goes to plan, and how the right was started for a reason. The chosen ones had a real purpose. They were headed to replenish Elysium by bringing younger, newer gods into the fold, gods who knew what it was like to be mortal. It's a balance in a way, one designed to offset those who would live such long lives they'd forget just how fragile and precious mortal life is. And I think it's a really good illustration. Like, you know, when you're growing up and people are like, as you're getting older and you're holding jobs, and people are just like, oh yeah, just work one day in retail, or just you should always have like one job in retail, one job in food service, so you like kind of get some empathy for people. I think this is like a great illustration of like, you don't know until you walked in somebody else's shoes kind of thing.
Yep.
And then they're talking about Colas and how he's the oldest primal alive. We may never be able to kill him. We may only ever be able to weaken him enough to entomb him, which, based off of the reading order, we know that, you know, they successfully entomb him. We just don't know how. Yeah, we just don't know how. So I have
and
to
we
think about
won't
that
until the new book comes out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure we haven't figured that out yet.
And you're thinking, but wait, there's a whole other book after this. We know.
Oh yeah. That's another thing. Me and Sam have already talked about it. We're still trying to decide if the next book we want to cover is the next Nyktos and Sarah story, or if we want to go back to Poppy and Cass. We are leaning toward going Poppy and Cass, but we'll let y'all know how we decide to proceed.
Our emotions factor into this with this next book.
So. Correct. Nyktos also says, once I have the embers inside me, the rot should vanish from the mortal realm, from your kingdom. And then they discuss poppies. The flowers that were nothing like those in the mortal realm had delicate petals the color of blood in the moonlight on the outside and were a shade of crimson on the inside. They only opened when someone approached them. Poisonous, beautiful flowers that were unpredictable and temperamental and reminded him of me. Well, pick a poppy, pull something
pick a
till
pretty
it bleeds.
poppy, pull its thorns.
Listen here, I can't say Peter Piper, whatever. Niktos also gives some background that even when his father died, the rot didn't spread fast. It continued slowly year after year, taking little pieces at a time and turning the world gray as the sun grew weaker and the nights even longer. Then, seemingly overnight, all the trees in the dying woods dropped their leaves and all the lakes dried up. That was the last of the seasons and sunlight here, but outside of the Shadowlands, it continues to spread slowly. And then we're having like a whole reflection period with Sarah, how she's just like, I she's processing all of these things because he says that in 5 months it would have happened 21 years ago. And she's
Which
just
is
like,
when she was born.
I didn't know how to put into words what I was thinking, let alone feeling, because it was something I'd never considered before. A future without an early certain death, a possibly very long future, one that could possibly span hundreds of years. I felt hope for myself. It felt a little selfish since his plan carried the risk of more attacks between now and the possibility of us not being able to locate the missing god or the god being of no help to us. There was a lot of risk, but there was also hope. And I think this is the first time she's allowing
felt that.
herself to, like, she felt like more at the end of chapter 8.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's feeling like maybe she doesn't have to die. Maybe she can live a life. Maybe there's a chance. Maybe just all
It's
these
her
maybes.
first, like she even says, it's her first time thinking that maybe she won't have to die.
Correct.
Like, I don't know who wouldn't feel hope. Maybe be a little scared because you never thought about your life after a certain point because you thought, what's the point? But now you can, and that's scary because it's like
Terrifying.
there are things I never had to think about before that now I might have to think about. Like, oh,
And then they talk about the coronation and how, like, he didn't say how all the primals could be in attendance, gods, XYZ thing. And he says that you showed no fear with the Dakai and didn't hesitate when the entombed gods were freed. I know you're strong and can fight, that you're brave. Needing me or anyone to look out for you doesn't mean you're weak, that you can't defend yourself, or that you're afraid. We all need someone to watch over us. And she goes, "Do you?" And he says, "Desperately."
oh.
And then, of course, they are interrupted yet again during their discussion. And Scion is there saying the Sumerians,
Sumerians, I think.
Sumerians, yep, Sumerians are there.
The good
Sumerians were,
Samaritans.
yeah, I really was going to say
Sorry.
that. They were lesser gods a couple of generations removed from Ates. I'm going to say Ates, the primal of accord and war, and kin, the primal of peace and vengeance. Gods born fully formed as warriors. There were even legends about them being brought forth during mortal wars by kings brave or foolish enough to summon either Ates or kin. And so she asks, why would Ates or kin send warriors here? And they correct her and say that not all of them serve Ates and kin, and they have come from Hanan's, which is the court in which Belle comes from. Kind of,
Yep.
now that she's ascended, she low key can challenge for
Which is
that spot.
understandable then why the Sumerians are Hanans.
Correct.
I call them Hanan, so this is weird, but like, yeah, why they're here.
Mm. Um. So then they're talking about the difference between Dakai and Sumerians, and the Dakais want to devour those with ether in them, but the Sumerians pull strength from it. The essence amplifies their abilities and makes them stronger.
Yes.
Um,
Always a
and
twist.
so, then they're talking about how Sarah can fight, kind of thing, and Nyctos is telling Sarah that she needs to stay there, and she's like, I can help, I can fight. And then and then Ector says she really can fight, and with most of the guards. And then Nyctos cuts him off and says, Ector. And Ector goes, yes. And Nyctos says, this is one of those times I've discussed with you on multiple occasions. And he says, when I need to shut the fuck up. And Nyctos goes, exactly.
It's a meal.
Um, yeah, and it's cracks me up so yeah, we drew the comparison to a meal. And then Scion said he's honored to obey such a command because he's left with Sarah, obviously. And he goes, so you ready for a nap time, or would you like a snack? Maybe some apples? And there's our Nile.
Yep. I love it
And
so
then
much.
they bring back the discussion about snapping her neck, and he says, as such, it would be now dishonorable to speak of snapping your neck, but she's like, but completely honorable to do so before. And he said, probably not, considering you're technically the true primal of life, which means I should be bowing before you. And she's like, please don't. And then of course Sarah being Sarah, she's getting her shit together to go help in the fight, and Sion's like, what are you doing? And he goes, I really hope it involves napping, but I have a feeling it doesn't. And she goes, I'm going to push.
I love it.
No one's
I love that
surprised.
line. I'm gonna go push. And it's like, oh yeah, she is. Yeah, she is. So yeah, so chapter 11 starts out. She's climbing the rise. It says, as I climbed the stairs of the rise, the stars sweeping across the deep gray sky, twinkling like a sea of gems, signaling that night wasn't too far away. This is such a bad idea, Cyan muttered from behind me for the 100th time. A terrible, horrible idea. If something happens to you, and she goes, nothing will happen to me. It's fine. We're fine. Let's keep going. And he's like, it's a bad idea, horrible. And she found some arrows and a nice, why can I not think of the word?
A bow?
A bow. English is hard. And he says, well, that just made this horrible idea worse. And
Accurate.
she's peering over the wall, finding Niktos first without even trying. She realizes it's the embers in her that make it so she can do that. And so she's thinking like, oh, I know where he is, which means he's probably highly aware of where I am right now and is going to be very angry. And no,
Oh, well.
not at all. Not at all. Why would someone be angry?
Mm-hmm.
So we hear Dorkin.
Let's go say Dorkin.
That dork over there, who's a Cimmerian, talking to them, and Niktos basically calls him an idiot for making a blood oath with Hanan. And coming there, he's asking for Belle, saying, you know where she is, bring her to us. And it's basically like, no, we don't know what you're talking about, she's not here kind of vibes. And this is where Sarah kind of learns for the first time that he has an army, right? Yeah, she learns he has an army. Something she didn't know before, but at the same time, like, why would she have needed to know that? Why would anyone have told her that for the short time that she's been there? And things always go real well in these situations. They talked him down, and everyone went home, and it was a happy night. They're fighting. Swords are out, Draken are up. It's full-blown fighting. Sarah's full-blown in it. I want to know how far they are from the rise, if she can see everything that's going on, honestly.
It must be like a raptor situation.
It has to be, because they can't get to her as easily. But yeah, so she's having trouble because the embers are kind of coming up, because there's a lot of killing going on. But dagger hissed through the air, passing where she was. People are getting sick of her shooting them with arrows. And it says, Niktos' eyes snapped to the rise, the bright silver of his irises flashed with luminous ether as I leveled the bow towards him. Our gazes locked for only a heartbeat. Niktos tilted his head as I pulled the string taut and fired. Do you think he thought she was aiming at him?
No, not at all.
Okay, because it says he whipped around as the arrow struck the Cimmerian, charging him from behind. I smirked as he looked over his shoulder, his lips tipping up faintly. That's why I was like, he kind of looked at her like, you doing that to me? Like, what are you doing? But I could also see him just being like, oh, you see something? Let me just move my head for you. Niktos and Sion had failed to mention that the Cimmerians could somehow use whatever they manifested to scale the rise in basically seconds.
Yeah, well.
So it's great. It's great. But, they make this darkness that you can't see through. But our cute little Sarah she's trained for this moment, towing the line once again.
Honestly, though, this is like probably Like I know there are a lot of stuff that there's a lot of things that happen, but this is probably like top tier things where he literally was on the line walking it.
She even says, she's like, I almost laughed, thinking Holland really did walk that fine line of interference. And so
Mm-hmm.
I like how she's like, it's not like she has spidey senses. She just knows where they're gonna be. But she's using that darkness of like feeling the air, like all her other senses coming into light, and she's just pew 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 pew
That's
until
literally not
Niktos.
how that goes.
Let me live my life with my sound effects, okay? Okay. Now Niktos is up there, and she almost struck him with a spear, and um, he's saying that's not a way to repay me. And she says, "How should I repay you?" Anyways, now they're fighting. He's trapping her between the parapet wall and himself, and now Nectus is up there. Um, and she's thinking not some pleasant thoughts at the moment. She said there was something wrong with my thoughts because they immediately went to a wholly inappropriate place, conjuring up the memories of Nictus behind me, his large and powerful body caging mine just as he did now, leaving no space between us, no opportunity to even move my head.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we like. And obviously, she's projecting because he's like, "You're going to be the death of me." And she says, "We both know that's not possible." Um, and then he realizes she's been angered and the fighting's kind of winding down. Dorkin is still alive. And Cyan tells him he's seen her. He's seen Sarah. He knows what's going on. And Nikto says that my generosity has come to an end. Dorkin showed no reaction. I don't know what you're thinking by refusing Hanan, but whatever it is, it will end badly for you. He'll go to Colas and more will come. I'll be waiting, Nikto says, unsheathing his sword, striking as fit as a pit viper, as fast as a pit viper, and severing the Cimmerian's head from his shoulders. Ripper Dipper
Mm-hmm.
Skipper.
That is
So,
not what I wrote, but like that is usually what I say.
well,
Yeah,
you wrote Rip Dorkin, and I knew you would have said Ripper Dipper. So,
that is correct.
oh, oh yeah, a nice fight scene. We need those every. It's like a cleanse the palate. We need a nice fight scene every now and again.
And always be
Um,
sex.
never mind. Uh, so they're back in the office. Raina's with her, and so is Ector. Um,
My
Rain's
fave.
eyeing her. Ector doesn't care. He's basically almost asleep on the SETI. Um, and they're kind of like, it would calm my nerves if you sat. And she says, pacing calms my nerves. I mean, she could be stabbing you, so,
True.
but, but it says, Rain eyed me as if he expected me to run out of Nictus's office at any given second and into the middle of a firestorm. He hadn't taken his eyes off me longer than it took to blink. Either Ector was on the SETI, he's napping. Um, and they're like, Ector saying, you should trust her. Um, oh yeah, she said, trust me when I say you prefer me to have calm nerves versus the opposite. He said, you're probably right, but trusting you. And she's like cursing because she's like, I get it, you can't trust her. And Ector says, you should trust her. Besides
Mm-hmm.
what she tried last night for us, for all of us, that Cimmerian was gunning for you. She saved your ass out there. If she hadn't hit him right between the eyes, you might be standing here with a couple extra holes or not standing at all. The least you can do is thank her. Like you pop off.
Mm-hmm.
Pop off, Ector. And she's like, nah, I don't need his gratitude. And Ector's like, well, too bad, you have mine. Like, you don't want it. And Rain says, and mine, thank you. And you can feel the sincerity in his words, the emotion behind it. It's just, Ector tells him he's being an ass, but we love Ector
Mm-hmm.
defending her. Like, that's, and Ector, especially because he's the oldest out of all of them, like, he was there when Ethos was the primal of life. Like, if he's able to be like, nah, we should trust her, then I think you should listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
We'll stop being an ass, Rain.
True.
And then oh gosh, heartburn. And then we feel a certain powerful primal coming into play, and Ector wisely says, Daddy Nyctos is not happy. And we know
True.
that is wise because it is true. And Rain says, at least it's not in response to something we did, and looks at Sarah. And he comes in and he's really mad. He's like, didn't I tell you to remain inside, to not push me on this? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, and yet you did. And she's like, yeah, I did. And he's like, I can't wait to hear your rationale on this. I'm sure it involves something along the lines of, I do what I want because I can and fuck the consequences.
Mood.
Great impersonation of her. And she says, from the moment that I learned that I no longer had to answer to a duty I never had a choice in accepting, I became my own person, someone who gets to make their own choices. I will not be ordered about and told what I can and cannot do as if I have no power or control over my life. No matter what risks I may be taking, I am done living like that. Atta girl.
Retweet.
I love that she stands up for herself.
Me too. She's a
And
boss ass bee.
and Nyctos is just, he kind of like takes several steps back and just kind of stares at her and then tells them to retrieve a clean bowl of water and a cloth, and the other just needs to leave. I think it's
Pretty
after
much.
he wants to leave.
Probably.
And they're like, yeah, we're gonna make ourselves scarce, gonna get out of here. He's checking her wounds to avoid telling her about the sacrifice that Rain kind of didn't
Alluded
mention it
to.
earlier, but he alluded that he made a sacrifice for her. And she's now kind of asking him about it, like, I want to know what you sacrificed for me. And he's avoiding telling her. And he says, and she's like, wait a minute, do you think that you took advantage of me while you gave me my blood? And he says, I knew what my blood would do to you. I should have been able to restrain myself or left you alone the moment you started feeling the effects. And she says, my reaction had very little to do with the blood. He's like, Sarah. And she says, and everything to do with my attraction to you. I told you that then. It hasn't changed. Like, listen here, dude. She's telling you what she wants, and it's
you, dumbass.
It's you, you idiot. I want you. And they're talking about the embers in her blood, in her basically, and how like he was warm because he had fed from her. And he was talking about how her blood tastes like the summer storm, but also tastes like heat, power, life, yet soft, airy, like sponge cake.
I like sponge cake.
Right? And she's like what? And he's like, moving on. He says, I use ether to will myself where I want to go. It's called shadow stepping. Oh, because she's like, how do you keep getting here so quickly? And he's like, I'm not running fast or anything. I'm not Edward Cullen. I don't run fast. I just kind of will myself to move and I move. I'm more of a badass. And she's wondering if Tarek could taste it. He knew he had an ember in him. Then they talk about her blood, shadow stepping. We're thinking about Tavius, who no one wants to think about.
Correct. Nobody at all wants to remember who he was as a shitty
ever.
Pooper.
No.
Anyway.
And they're kind of getting into the real stuff, talking about like her life and how she was treated. And that's why she's thinking about Tavius and the things that he did. And she's like, I don't want to think about it. And I wouldn't want to think about him either. And she doesn't know why he's defending some of the people, like Ezra. And she says they deserve to be defended.
Yep.
Which is true. Like they couldn't really do anything about it, but they still treated her like her.
Correct.
He tells her, but you were a princess. And she says, I was never that. I was never a princess. And he's feeling bad because, he feels a lot of responsibility because he denied her thinking it would free her, and it did the opposite.
Correct.
And I love how he's like, I'll go right now. I'll go and like kill your mom if you want it, if you want me to. Like you say the word. And man, the temptation that probably was of like, oh,
It's a good
that bitch
idea.
could be out of my life. But
Very
no.
true.
She says no. It wouldn't be worth it. And he's just like, if you ever change my mind, I know a guy who can get it done.
Honestly, though.
Honestly though. And they're talking about the embers of life are strong. And she's like, yeah, I figured that I can bring people back from the dead, and apparently some of them when I'm really angry. And he said, I wasn't talking about either of those things. You were cut with shadow stone. That would kill a mortal. It would also kill a godling. Your skin and veins would already bear the mark of it, and what blood of mine you have in you wouldn't have stopped it. So then she realizes, hey, this cut, that's just a cut. It wasn't just a cut. And says, Nikto smiled faintly, makes me wonder how else the primal embers may be protecting you.
Anyway, moving on to chapter 13. Wait. Talking about how the embers are protecting her. Do we make this reference before? I feel like we might have made this reference before. About Charmed? It's giving Charmed.
Yeah.
Wyatt protecting her,
Piper being
Anyway.
pregnant with Wyatt. Yeah, I love it.
Anyway, chapter 13, she goes back to her chambers and she sees that there's a padlock on the balcony doors, and she smirks as she stares at it, and she's like, does he think I couldn't pick a lock kind of vibe? But like, I digress.
He's trying.
Kind of a mood.
He's trying.
And Sarah is I love this chapter. I love this chapter. I love this chapter. Anyway, Sarah is trying to get some sleep, but frankly, she is spiraling in her own way, and she
She's a little
is
wound up.
a little wound up, frustrated, as one can be when you are in the presence of Nyctos, and I don't blame her at all. So she decides she's going to take care of her frustrations. And while this is occurring, of course, she feels like a presence in the room and like shadows, forming. She doesn't see anyone, but she feels them. She feels someone watching her. And it is Nyctos.
I sure hope so.
I mean, there was a sound quiet and too quick for me to make out. My eyes flew open, sweeping past the door to the drapes drawn across the balcony door. I saw nothing but shadows and night, but the chamber, it felt different. The darkness seemed charged. And she's like, had I turned off the lamp? Had it even been on when I laid down? I couldn't remember thanks to the whiskey and the wine, but the chamber was empty except for me and my need, which felt as if it had become its own entity, filling the space even beyond the bed. I closed my eyes again, willing myself to sleep. In the quiet, all I could think about was Nyctos's mouth closing on my throat, and I'm not going to read the next part of that.
So I love this chapter for this part, but I just want to point out that we all talk about shadow daddies with these series, like Azrael, Xaden, and Nyctos, but I feel like this is the first time we see a true shadow daddy using his shadows in this way. Like, because
I
is
guess
a shadow right now.
Xaden doesn't necessarily, he like uses his shadow as like a protection barrier, but he doesn't necessarily use. That's a good point.
Like, because like she literally like, okay, this isn't too bad. It says, I gasped at the wisp of dark air that kissed my calf and another licked my inner thigh. Like, it's not him. It's just the air, the shadows.
It's the wispies.
Yeah.
I don't know why I did that. And
wispies. I could barely see the tendrils of night, but I felt them. The cool burn was all I could feel. Like, and she feels it like going around her body and like.
And then it fades when he leaves. But she, at the end of this part, she even says, I felt Nyctos.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah. So like we talk about shadow daddies, but really I think this is the king of all shadow daddies for this moment right here. So
correct. Until further notice.
You may move on now.
Then the next part is when she wakes up the next day and Nectus is like, did you sleep well? And like she's choking on her juice. She's just like, does he know? Does he have eyes in this room of mine? And awkward. So she's just in her own little world over there, and Sarah ends up joining Nectis and Jadis on a little adventure. Nectis asks Sarah about Ash's plan, and she's wishing that they could just go see Delphi now. Like, she gets the coronation and adds some layer of protection, but like she just wants to get shit done. And they're talking about the journey, and Nectis explains how it's not the veil that's dangerous, it's the road to the veil. We will need to travel to the pillars of Asphodel to enter the veil. Anything can happen between here and the pillars, and as you should know by now, gods can enter the Shadowlands at will, so can primals. There are no rules preventing me from burning a god to a crispy stick if I see fit. The same cannot be said for primals. I cannot fight one, neither can the gods who serve in Ash's court unless they attack Ash or his consort.
Another
So,
reason why
consort is
it's
important.
vital for her to be consort, because the Draken hands are tied if
Correct.
she's not.
So it's really just all defenses being put into place. So they're talking, and then Rain comes and interrupts to go talk to Nectis. And during this time, that's not what. Anyway,
but I'll save it for if he dies or something.
Anyway, Jadis and Reaver start playing, and Jadis throws a fit, and this whole back and forth banter goes on, and she lights a chair on fire. And Nectis was like, I'm gone for 2 minutes. And Sarah's all like, that was not 2 minutes, bro. She like wreaked havoc, whatever.
As a parent, I felt that very deeply.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did. And then Nyctos, of course, comes in. Nectis is trying to be a parent. Nyctos is being the cool uncle, saying, like, it's all good that you burned a chair. And Nectis is like, it is not okay. No matter how many chairs there are. And then they're transitioning into talking about Sarah's gown, and Nectis is like, I see nothing wrong with it. And Nyctos is like, Nexus is like, remind me to check in with Erlina to see when she will be done with her clothing. And Nectis and Nyctos are going back and forth. Like, of course you wouldn't see anything wrong with it, Nectis. And Nectis is like, I find it to be many things, none of which are wrong, and I could list them for you. And Nyctos is like, not necessary. And Sarah's like, if I'd known you were going to insult the gown that doesn't even belong to me, I would have chosen to visit what's left of the entombed gods instead. Honestly, that's mood. Like, I don't need to be shit on. It's fine. And then they move on from this conversation, and they're talking about Reaver going through the same thing when he was Jadis's age, and that he's quite confident we lost at least 2 chambers worth of items to his temper tantrums. And Sarah has this moment where she's picturing Reaver having temper tantrums, and she's like having a hard time, and she asks what happened to Reaver's parents. And she finds out that they died defending the Shadowlands before he was old enough to even shift into mortal form. Kolos grew annoyed when I didn't answer his summons immediately. He sent several of his Draken, and after that I learned that I could only delay in answering his summons for so long.
That's so sad. Another reason to hate Kolos.
We need more reasons. And then they're talking about missing people, or they're talking about hating people and missing people. And Sarah says that Ezra believes you can't hate someone you've never met. And Sarah goes, she's wrong. I've never met Kolis, and I hate him. And Nyctos goes, I don't think you have to know someone to feel a certain way toward them. I don't even think you have to truly know someone to miss them. And Sarah goes, really? And he says, I miss many I barely know. The experiences never shared, the history never made, the memories never created. The past that's never mourned, and the future that's never anticipated. Thought that was really beautiful. And so then, she's asking what would Nyctos have done if Kolis if the embers of life hadn't been placed in her bloodline. And she said, based on what you said in the throne room, it's clear you haven't simply accepted this way of life to live under someone who slaughters without reason and commits the gods only know how many atrocities. It's great that they pluralize gods, but it confuses me when I read it. And then Nick just is quiet, and she goes, are you planning to go to war with Kolis?
Who would do that?
Why would they? Anyway.
A horrible idea. No.
So then we go into chapter 14. Nyctos's fingers continue to tap, matching the tempo of her heart. He says to openly speak of such a thing against the king of gods would earn one, even a primal, a sentence in the darkest parts of the abyss where even a god of death would not willingly travel. And she's like, I doubt that has stopped you from writing just that. And he's like, well, what do you think a war would look like? And she's like, something unimaginable. And he confirms that.
Not just a war, but a war of primals.
Yeah, I think that is something really like unfathomable, at least in my brain.
Yeah.
And then Sarah has her own like mini spiral. She, thinks about the future. If Nyctos's plans regarding the Embers worked, she could be Nyctos's consort for hundreds of years, if not more. If they all survived, like she's wondering what her life would look like. And Nyctos is like, "What are you thinking about?" And she's like, "Just your plan." And he says, "I don't think that's true." And because she's projecting sadness, and he's like, "When is it that you speak the truth?" And she goes, "When I'm comfortable doing so."
Ooh,
Honestly, like that's valid.
mood though. Yeah.
Um, and Sarah goes, when I first arrived, you said I could go wherever I wanted inside these walls in the courtyard. Does that still stand? And he says it does. And she's like, you're not worried about me making a run for it. And he says, not when I've made it. So every guard patrols the rise, and the palace is sure to watch the gates. So she essentially decides to stay in Nyctos's office and decides she wants to be somewhat of a bit of a distraction.
Just a little bit.
Just
She's
just
just asking him about his work.
something like that. And then they
Dress that
talk
can barely
about
contain her boobs, no big deal.
uh then they talk about her needs, you know what I'm saying? And he says, as long as you're my consort, you will be very selective about how you spend your time with others, in terms of she has to fulfill her own needs, apparently. So he tells her that I'm sure you can resist those desires or handle them yourself, and she goes, because you watched me do it. And Nikto said nothing, his gaze now on my mouth, and she goes, you watched me last night, you touched me, I felt you. Inside me, that was highly inappropriate of you. And then he says, more inappropriate than you doing what you did while you knew I was watching? And
My
then
room, buddy.
honestly, and then she proposes a pleasure for pleasure's sake deal, which, let's be real, guys, this is terrible idea. What could go wrong? And and then in comes ATs. Now my
I say
brain is
Addis, but whatever.
that's neither here
It's
nor
a
there.
taste, but I'm not saying that. So
Okay. Um, and so essentially Nyctos like warns her like sorry for what's about to go down, kind of, and
our version of a throne room scene in Court of Mist and Fury.
correct. Um, and so they're going back and forth, and Nyctos is all like, if you keep looking at her like that, I'll cut your eyes from your sockets and feed them to Sati. Oh, where have we heard that name before? Um, And Sarah goes, suddenly I knew why Nyctos had felt the need to apologize ahead of time for his behavior. Everything he was doing was in plain sight of a tease. No, I don't want to say that. Nyctos was making it very clear that I was his. The problem was I didn't entirely mind. And honestly, um, and then Sarah comes in. Sarah comes in to defend herself. And she says, I doubt you prefer the taste, because ATs calls her an accessory. And she says, I doubt you prefer the taste of eyes more than your steed, but refer to me as an accessory again, and it will be you who feeds on them. Um, and he loves a bark and a bite, so don't you worry. And he essentially comes to say that you killed my Sumerian, those who came to your rise, and they served Hanan, so Nyctos is like, if you had such concern for them, you should have taught them better than to serve a coward. And Atis is like, as much as it pisses me off to admit this, you have a point there, but you also killed Dorkin, and I was under the impression you two were fond of each other. Um, and like, I think this is a really good illustration of how like he has to kind of pick and choose like the caring can only go so far kind of thing. And I know that it hurt him. Anyway, he says I may have tolerated him, but whatever tolerance I have for someone ends when they come to my court, make demands, and attack my guards.
I think it just shows what end he'll go to protect Sarah too. Like, I've known
Correct.
this man for years. We didn't hate each other, but he's a risk now. He's got to die.
Correct. And then so Nick just is like, what's the point of you being here? And AT's is like, I assume your soon to be consort is wise enough not to repeat what's discussed. And 80s is like, I also hope you're more careful with your tone. I may find your boldness refreshing, alluring even, others will not. And Nyctos is like, those who do not won't live long enough to wallow in their insult. Because my consort will likely plunge a dagger into their hearts before I'm even aware of what has occurred. And Sarah likes that a lot, honestly, that she like doesn't need, he portrays her as a damsel that doesn't need to be protected.
Yep.
And so they're talking about the ascension of Bel, and we already know where this is going. And essentially Colas sent ATs to deliver a message, and Colas is aware that you've taken a consort and His Majesty has decided to deny you a right to a coronation. Because
Cool.
Because he's great. Overjoyed.
Yeah, Nyctos is a little too calm about this, and he's like, has he now? And Addis says he has. And Sarah doesn't know what that means. And he says it means that Nyctos must gain Colas's permission to crown a consort. And she says, son of a bitch, which is basically what I said in the notes too. I just called him
Correct.
Like, son of a bitch. That's it. And Addis says, did you just call the king of gods a son of a bitch?
Correct. I did.
And she's kind of like, because that's a big no-no if he was actually like super loyal to Colas.
Mm-hmm.
And he just laughs, and Nyctos is like, so when does he expect me here? When does he expect me? The coronation's supposed to be tomorrow. And he just straight up says there will be no coronation tomorrow. Instead, Colas will summon you, both of you, when he is ready. That's all he said.
Helpful.
So take a sweet time if he wants. It could be a year from now if he really wanted to. It could be tomorrow, a week, a month. And he says, I think you would have done this anyways, even if a god hadn't ascended here, because after all, you are his favorite. And we have a feeling favorite doesn't actually mean favorite. But what do we know? We haven't been doing this long.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and he's basically like, yeah, it's time for you to leave. And he's like, yeah, I should leave. But then he decides to flirt with Sarah before he leaves. And then he gets his life very threatened. And Nyctos asks Sarah for a distraction. He wants her essentially to fight with him, is what he asks for, saying, correct, distract me, something to stop me from going after Addis and taking my anger out on him. That will not end well for the Shadowlands or Vathi, and that's the last thing we need. Because it's not really Addis that's the problem, it's Colas that's the problem, but he's there to, yeah. And she decides, I don't want to argue with you, I'm gonna kiss you instead, kind of like we did in the tunnels of the Lux, whatever, when they first met.
Lux, and, honey, it's Lux.
You know what? I don't know with this book, okay? It's a pronunciation nightmare. But we love it. And so she kisses him, which is really, really good distraction. And she describes it as how it felt sinking under the surface of her lake. It felt like a wild sort of peace. It felt right. And that scared her.
Mood.
That's fair. But he calms down, essentially. She's still in his lap. And they're both kind of like, well, we're not moving. Finds out he's highly aroused by it, but that he's going to keep her there. And he was just like, I had to act that way because if Addis knew or thought that we weren't attracted to each other, he would like you even more than he does now. And she was like, What? Because apparently Addis is driven by 3 needs: peace, war, and fucking. Which really, that's in any order. If he had so much as had an idea there was a little attraction between us, he would have been more interested in you than he was. And that's when then she's like, I threatened him, and he's like, yeah, you threatened me, but here we are.
True.
And she's basically like, I can get up now. And he's like, no, you can't. We need to talk about the shit Cola's just pulled, and there's a chance I won't remain level. And she's like, what does that have to do with me being in your lap? And Nectus says,
I love him.
because if he loses his cool, he could hurt you. And with you so close to him, he won't risk it. And I mean,
love Nectus.
really,
Oh,
right? It's like, Sarah, do you need a reason not to be in his lap? Just stay there. Just
correct.
stay there. And so they're talking about Addis basically told them what's going on, and she didn't know that this is something that could happen. And they said primals and gods sought his approval before coronation, hoping he would give his blessing. But and that was when Ethos was the primal of the god of the primals. He says, but Colas hasn't done it once, nor has he ever shown any interest in such a thing. But I should have expected this, that he'd pull this shit.
Correct.
After all, you are his favorite.
I love that we just synchronized that. Cool.
And they're wondering if he would think that if he thought it was Nyctos who had the embers. And Nectus said Colas would know it's not Ash. He's already tested Ash enough to know he has no embers left in him. And it doesn't take one to really put 2 and 2 together of knowing that there's only one way you can really test that someone doesn't have embers, and that's just to kill a bunch of people in front of them.
Stab.
Yeah. And then we realize that Addis is an issue because he can also kind of project onto other people. He can
amplify their emotions.
He can use his ether to amplify calmness or violence. And he was doing it onto her, and she's like, but I didn't feel calm or more violent than normal. And they're like, exactly, which means he knows there's something up, because even if you're a godling, it still would have worked. The only thing immune to a primal is another primal. So he knows something's up now.
Ripper
Dipper. She starts to kind of have a panic attack. He tells them to get lost so he can calm her down, telling her it's going to be okay. And then she's getting worried about, like, if she looks like Satoria, which is a big, like, it's honestly, like, I would be worried too. Like, what's going to happen if I look like her and he takes me? Like, what are we going to do? And he's basically like, he's not going to touch you. You're not going to go near him. And she's like, I'm not going to let you be the reason why something happens. And he said, Colas has been the reason, not you, not your actions. It has been him, always him. You need to understand that, Sarah. You are not at fault. You tell her.
True.
And he's like, I'm not going to allow you to be in danger. And she's like, I'm already in danger. I've been in danger my whole life. If my refusal to answer his summons caused something to happen for people to be hurt, I couldn't deal with that. And he decides he's now feeling a little defensive. And he's like, is that the only reason why you don't want to do it? And she's like, what other reason could be? And he's like, isn't this what you wanted? To get back at Colas? Like, dude, you had to open your mouth. He said, this way you wouldn't have to try to escape, would you? And kind of a low blow to her after everything.
No
and
shit.
She basically said, fuck you, and left. And who's waiting in the hallway for her but our wonderful Nectus? And she's like, great, you're following me. And he says, you're very astute, Mia Liesa. And she's like, you don't like, and she sighed. He's like, you don't like being referred to as a queen, do you? And she said, you're very astute, Mia Draken. And he laughed and said, I didn't know I was your Draken. Nectus, you're all of our Drakens. And she's like, well, you're as much as my Draken as I am your queen. And he is queen, coronation or not, you're the queen. You carry the only true embers of life in you. You're the queen. Like, you're not just a queen or a consort, you're the queen of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That's another reason for me to go, huh, I'm gonna need to sit down for a minute. Um, and they're talking about the things that Ash, or he calls him Ash, Nyctos, whatever, had to do to convince Colas that he didn't hate him. He said, like, the Ash doesn't hate him with every fiber of his being and wants to see him chained beneath the ground. Colas doesn't know that. He thinks that Ash is only testing his limits when he rebels against him, pushes back, or something. Colas believes that Ash is as loyal to him as any other primal, and she's really confused. Like, he killed his parents. How could he not? And he's convinced Colas that he hated his father, that he considered Ethos weak and selfish, that he doesn't care about his mother since he never really knew her. Um, and if Ash hadn't been successful in hiding his true feelings toward him, Colas would have done worse than what he did after he took the embers. And that's when we learned that Colas killed every god and godling that served under Ethos, ensuring that none could ascend or replace the primal of life.
Correct.
Those who were not at court were hunted down across Elysium and in the mortal realm, even godlings several generations removed from the court. Those who never went through the culling were slaughtered. If Colas knew how Ash really felt about him, he would have killed every god here, every mortal and godling, chained every drinking in the abyss. Colas would have leveled the Shadowlands. So we know he's kind
Crazy.
of convincing. Oh yeah,
Oh.
Colas is crazy. Nyctos is convincing.
Correct.
I mean, he could be a little crazy too.
Easy for you. Sorry.
And she's like, how can he be that convincing? And he says it's the same thing that drives you to be so convincing, that it's his duty to do whatever necessary to protect as many people as he can. And they go into the fact that, like, they're talking about Satoria now, and she's like, I'm not her. And she's like, no, but she's a part of you. Like, even if you're not her, she's in you. She's a part of you. Like, it's still something to consider. And they're talking about how they need to take the embers out. And then Nectus asks her, why don't you call him Ash anymore? And it's like, Nectus, stop with it. he's pulling out all the hard truths. But he says, why don't you call him Ash anymore? And she says, and she's like, I don't know. And he says that's a lie. And he tells her that Ash is what his father called him, and that for him to introduce himself as such meant something. And she says, maybe it did before, but he's not Ash to me any longer.
Tragic.
And Nectus, our loving Nectus, says he is how you wish him to be, as you are what you wish to be to those in the Shadowlands and beyond. That is up to you, no one else.
Nectus,
I love him.
you're a gem.
Such a gem. So she went back to her room and fought with air. She's feeling restless. She's like, has all this pent up energy, and I don't blame her. With after everything she just learned, I would need something physical to do as well. To, like, I just need to get this exertion out. Like, I'm stressing. I said she has good coping skills when she's restless and overthinking. She works out, we'd eat ice cream or drink and hate ourselves.
Correct.
So maybe we should take a page out of her book. But when she was fighting air, her opponents were alternating between Nyctos and herself because she was annoyed with them both for different reasons, which is a mood, honestly. And she says that doing this helps keep her mind empty. She sees working out. Oh, I said working out helped delay her overthinking, because once she was done and cleaned up, she just sat there and overthought some more about what was going on. And she's just kind of there, like, thinking about her and Nectus's talk and everything that she learned. And then who just barges in but good old Nyctos. And she says, did you think to knock first? And he said, nope. She should have, could have been busy. And he said, doing what? And she said, many things. Use your imagination. And he says, not sure if using my imagination would be wise. And, probably true. She says, I ate my dinner like a good girl, in case you were wondering. And I just love their relationship. And then she asked, did you need something? And he said, I only need one thing at the moment, sleep. And she says, thanks for sharing. And he reminds her, arm's length. And she's like, are you freaking serious? And he's like, look, I'm not stupid enough to think you can't pick that lock if you wanted to. And he says, you promised me you wouldn't go after Collis again. I want to believe you, but I want cannot be more important than what I know. If presented with an opportunity, you will still take it. Even now, I'm not going to let that fragile trust be broken so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he knows her.
Couldn't be me.
uh, and they're going into the room, and he's saying at least she doesn't have the breeches and boots. And she says, I think you prefer that once you see what's under the robe. And he's basically said, please tell me you're not naked. He lives in constant fear of not being able to control his needs around her. And they talk about what he caught her doing and all that fun stuff, man. All that fun stuff. And he asks to unbraid her hair, which I think it was cute. I like that he takes the time to do that. And he even apologized for how he acted earlier, which is really nice. Not many men would do that. But they basically, he asks her about holding her breath, and she didn't realize it was noticeable. But he's like, no, but I notice it. And he says, why do you need to do it? And she doesn't know. And a little silent moment, and they get the arm's length. And she says, I closed my eyes trying to ignore how much I enjoyed feeling his arm. It wasn't until that moment I realized I'd done something I'd never done in my entire life. I'd left my dagger in my bedchamber.
True.
I love it.
Safety.
And then the next morning, she was in a mood, which is a mood. A morose mood, as Holland would call it. It had been with me upon waking on what should have been my coronation day, but for the second time in my life, I'd woken up on the day I was supposed to be married, only for those plans to change. She talks about the moods and how they seem to come and go with the changes of the wind, often striking in the night when I couldn't sleep and had nothing to occupy her mind. Those were the nights that even the idea of occupying her body in the dens had no appeal. So basically, it didn't matter what she did. Nothing fixed the mood. That's when she wondered if she got these moods from her father, and maybe that's what played in his fall from the tower the night of her birth. And she says, if so, was that the only thing he'd left me? If such a thing could be passed down, I wasn't sure, but if so, I would have preferred something a little less dark.
Honestly, can you blame her? Her life is already surrounded by darkness.
Yeah. It really is. And she's kind of being idle. She's not used to being idle. She doesn't like how it makes her feel. She likes to have a purpose, something to do. And she says, I leaned into the chase, feeling as if I could sink into the upholstery and become part of it until I faded away. And would it that kind of be lovely? And then she said, no. My heart started thumping as I sat up and my muscles going rigid. She does her breathing. She says, that was a bad thought, uncomfortable, suffocating. I smothered it suddenly. I smoothed suddenly damp hands over my bare knees. The chamber was too small as I sat there. I was too small, shrinking with each passing second. What a mood. So she gets out of her room. She's like, nah. And I made a note in the thing about how much I love how mental health is covered in this.
Even at the end.
Yeah. It is heavily covered and put in such a relatable way. And I just think Jennifer handled it in a beautiful way. And I just love how it is done. So she ends up eating breakfast with Reber with Reber. She learns from Seon that Ector, who was alive and knew both of Nyctos' parents, kept the rooms that are unused clean in honor of Ethos' memory, which I love. I think that really shows someone who cares about Ethos and the family. And then we get some background and to Sion and Rahar. They are from the Triton Isles, which is Thanos' court. And we learn kind of about like what led them to leave, how they used to have these games to honor Thanos, but they were very dangerous and people would die. And one year the king's son died, and so the king ended the games believing Thanos to be benevolent and that he would see that, oh, this is what is best. But no, Thanos was pissed and insulted, and so he saw it as a lack of faith, and so he flooded the kingdom, whole entire kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
just wiped it away. No warning, no chance for people to escape. Um, Everything and everyone within Fife were taken into the seas. And when they learned of what he'd done, they were shocked, couldn't believe it. He did that over games that we knew damn well he hadn't even paid that much attention to. And then, even if the king's son had done something to one of his daughters, that doesn't justify taking the lives of an entire kingdom. We couldn't serve him after that. We weren't the only ones who left, but that's why we left. Um, and they'd be like, why would he do that if you didn't think he could do that? And they say if you ask Hector, he'd say that the essence of the primals changed when Colas took over.
Yeah, that
Became
makes
a little bit
sense.
less benevolent and caring. Which is crazy when you think about it. But then he gets into how they met Nyktos. He was there at the court in Dalos. Yeah. Um, Thanos sent others after those who left the court following the incident with Pyth shortly after Ethos was killed. They found them, brought them to the court of Delos, where the gods are sentenced and punished. And, Nyktos visited them and then left. And she's like, wait, he just left? And he's like, yeah, we thought the same thing. He was an asshole, whatever. But then he came to court the next day when Thanos arrived. And just before we were sentenced, Nyktos intervened, said that Thanos didn't have the right to sentence us, as we no longer served him, but served the primal of death instead. I doubt anyone was more shocked than Rahar and me at the announcement, but Nyktos, man, he's a tricky son of a bitch when he wants to be. You see, when he visited us the day before, he touched us both when he left, reaching through the bars and patted our shoulders. We didn't think anything of it. The only thing we both thought afterwards was that the cell was colder, like that we were colder. That was it. But when he touched us, he took our souls.
Epic Nyktos move, though. Can we
Right?
just
Love it.
and anyway, we go into chapter 17, and Science just like fucking chaos erupted. We knew what that meant, especially Colas. You see, Colas supposedly pulled that shit all the time back when he was the true primal of death, except he did it when someone pissed him off. But either way, Nyktos had our souls. None of the other primals could touch us. We belonged to him. And Sarah like asks, did he give your souls back? And Scion says if he did, and Thanos? Yeah, it has to be Thanos because it's PH.
Yeah.
Sounds like an F.
Yeah.
Ever found out he could claim us once more. So he didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. Um, and um, he says that we're not the only lives he saved. And Sarah's like, I knew that, but still, Nyktos' actions were a lot to comprehend. Even thinking that what would happen if I'd successfully killed him made my heart stop and my chest ache. I picked up the glass of juice, finishing it off, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my throat or fortify the sudden weakness around that crack in my chest. She said, I truly believed that my duty to kill Nyktos was the only way to save my kingdom. No one, and I mean no one, can hate me more than I do. And Cyan goes, I actually believe that. Honestly,
What a man.
mood. And then we go into a little cute Reaver butt situation where he cranky, but
Don't wake him
also
up. You know how they say don't wake a sleeping child? Don't wake a sleeping Draken. Child, baby Draken.
Yep. And so then Sarah realizes that training happens, and she wants to train, so she asked Scion if like he'd train with her, and he was like, hell no, bitch, not gonna happen. And she's like, why not? And he says, because I prefer not to be gutted by Nyktos, which is exactly what would happen if I raised the sword against you, training or not. And she's like, that's ridiculous. And he's like, it is what it is. And she's like, you're serious, aren't you? And then so being her, she's like, I would like to know if it's possible for Scion to train with me. And She's like, he's afraid you will gut him if he does, which I'm hoping is an exaggeration to hide the fact that he's simply nervous that I will be far better with a sword than he is. And Sion's like, that is not the reason. What you said first was the truth. I'm simply nervous that my insides will end up on my outsides. So yeah, essentially she's trying to get the ability to train. Um, and um he said, or she says, I have a sword to use. There's a multitude of logical reasons for why I should continue my training, but since your guards are too nervous to train with me, then shouldn't it be you? And Rain's like, hell. And she says, or are you also nervous?
I
And
want to know, she
Nyktos,
doesn't just have a sword, she stole Cyan's sword.
yeah, well, listen, you know, it is what it is. Um, His eyes became a fire of primal essence ignited by either anger or something I chose not to think about at the moment. You do realize that most men would take their soon-to-be consort holding a sword to their throat in front of their guards as a great offense. Um, and she responds and says, which is one of the reasons I find most men to be easily offended. But you're not like most men, are you? And he says, I suppose not, since most would send their wives to their chambers for such an act. And she goes, soon to be wife. And if you order me to return to my chambers, my grip on this sword may slip an inch. Accidentally, of course. And she goes, intentionally. And he's like, you want to train with me? What are you waiting for? And, they fight, whatever. Um, and they go through this whole thing, and she's like, now that you have my attention, not like he didn't already have the attention. Um, He says, you have my full undivided attention now. Um, and a guard offers to watch over her, and he's like, that won't be necessary, cars, whatever. She wants to essentially have more freedom, and she starts listing the demands. She wants to start training. She wants to attend court. She wants to be involved in plans regarding Colas, and wants to go to the Vale and not wait. See her stepsister, and she wants suppers with him and to help in whatever way needed. And he says, and who determines how you're needed? She says, I do, as do you. So he kind of gives the ball in both of their courts, you know what I mean?
I love that.
And at the end of this whole demand conversation, he goes, you do realize I now need to tear my guard's eyes out. And she's like, why? And he goes, because they have too glimpsed your unmentionables. And one of the guards goes, worth it. And I'm
I
just
love it.
like, I just this banter is just so funny to me. Um, and she's like, that's unnecessary. And he goes, is it? And she goes, it also makes you seem quite possessive of what you refuse to claim. And Nikto stiffens behind her,
Ooh.
and she jerks to the side, shoves her elbow into his stomach hard enough to catch him off guard. He let go, reaching for the sword he put in the ground as I whirled, but I didn't go for it. I didn't need to. Niktos froze as silence fell over the courtyard. His gaze dropped to the shadowstone dagger I held at his throat and then flicked to mine. And he says, bravo. And she goes, who will train with me? And Hector goes, I'm sure there is now an exceedingly long list of volunteers. And Niktos goes, I will. You're going to lower that blade now? And she goes, better. And he says, not sure. And then she goes to Sion and says, I think I'll return to my chamber now. And Sion goes, fates. And then she looks at Niktos and says, until later. And Niktos watches her with intense silence as she picks up Sion's discarded sword and hands it hilt first to the god. I took a couple of steps toward the doors and then stopped, turning back to Niktos and his guards and giving them the most elaborate curtsy I was capable of. There were chuckles even from the reluctantly amused Rain, but it was Niktos's deep, rough laughter that stayed with me, and I think that is so beautiful.
So beautiful. I do love it.
Anyway, chapter 18, she returns back to her chambers. And someone knocks on her door about an hour after, and it's Paxton. He makes his way into the chamber, and Niktos asked him to bring fresh water for a bath And then she was like, I have the water from this morning. And he's all like, but it'll be freezing by now. And she's like, it's no big deal. Paxton is like, Niktos will take care of it. You'll see. And Niktos's door opened before Paxton could even knock on it. The primal stepped out into the hall, all coherent thought sort of abandoned her.
Good.
His damp hair was free, brushing his shoulders, and that piece I'd cut with the sword kissed the curve of his right cheek. He wore no shirt. Beads of water lingered on the hard, lean lines of his chest and stomach. His soft leather pants clung indecently. I mean, I'm sure it was decent to his lean hips, as if he barely allowed his body enough time to dry from the bath before putting them on. He hadn't even fastened them, and he's all like, "What's going on?" Whatever, dude. Anyway, so they're going back and forth about the water. Um, and Sarah's staring, and he's like, perhaps if you stopped ogling me for 5 seconds, you'd hear me. She's all like, I'm not ogling you. And Paxton's like, what does that mean? And Nick just defines it, and he's like, yeah, that's totally what you were doing. And listen. But Niktos fills the tub with steaming water, frothy bubbles, and her chest constricts. It had nothing to do with breathing. And this was what was taking him so long. And he like ensures that she'll be safe, and she couldn't speak. Her mouth was clamped shut so tightly that her jaw was beginning to ache, and it was an incredibly thoughtful gesture. I wiped my sudden damp paws against my hips. It was too thoughtful. And he like comes to the realization like it should have occurred to me that bathing in the chamber where you were attacked would be less appealing. And she's like, I don't deserve this. And he's like, everyone deserves fresh water to bathe themselves in and to do so in peace. And she's like, I don't deserve this from you. And he tells her that the other door is locked. No one can enter from here. Take your time. I'll be waiting in the bedchamber. Samantha, you're dirty. She stretches her legs out and she didn't reach the other side. The tub was deliciously obscene. I mean, this is the story of my life in any tub because I am a short person.
I wish that was the story of my life in a tub.
Yeah, well. And she says that what allowed her to relax wasn't the tub or the room was different. It was who waited just outside the door. She knew that she was safe. And then she falls asleep in the tub because, well, when you're relaxed and you feel safe, like what else are you gonna do? And so she wakes up to Niktos low-key watching her sleep. Um,
No bubbles
and
left.
yeah, I was gonna say with no bubbles left. And he's like, you do know you don't have to watch me, or you don't have to allow me to look upon such unmentionable places. She's like, I know. And he's like, and yet you still continue to allow it. And then we love big, bold, horny Sarah. She says, the thing is, Niktos, and then she rises out of the water, stirring what remained of the suds. My want of you isn't something my want of you isn't something I can control. Can't, huh? I don't
My
think
want
you
of you
does.
isn't something I can't control.
Yeah,
It's a
sure. It's a choice. I have the courage to admit that, and you don't. Now, if you excuse me, and he's all like, no, you are not excused. And
And then
well,
we go into a chapter I love.
Samantha, what chapter don't you love? To be
That's
honest with you.
fair. I love all these chapters, but especially this chapter. So basically he's kind of admitting to her of like, you know what, you're right. I did look at you longer than I should have while you slept in this bath. Thinking about that dime offer you made me, there are far more important things to be consumed about while looking at your breasts. He talks about looking at her in all the different places. He sat there and thinking about how she tasted, how she felt around him, uh, all the different places he could touch her. Um, he said, and I sat here looking at you and all your loveliness, wanting you so fucking badly, trying to remind myself of all the reasons, and they are vast, why I cannot acknowledge what you do to me, why I cannot afford you to be anything more than a distraction. And it kind of goes into this conversation about like he's saying, but instead, all I seem to be able to think about is how I look forward to you doing the exact opposite of what I ask. Dude, don't encourage her. Or how much I enjoy your teasing and your boldness. I think about how much that mouth of yours amuses me. He fixates on how she feels under him. You know, he's being bold. He's like saying everything that he's thinking now.
We love a
Um,
confident king,
oh
an
yeah.
assertive king, if you will.
Oh yeah. Um, and she realizes that he was likely on the edge and she just goaded him right over it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, she didn't care. She wanted it and needed it. And he basically says, "Is that brave enough for you? Real enough?" And she's basically goading him more, like, "Are you still thinking about it, or are you thinking about this?" And he's kind of like, "What do you think?" And so she tells him to prove it. And honestly, and then she's like, "Show me that's what you want, or are you going back to nothing more than talking?" Um, and basically he's taking the challenge. He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna do it." They're
Say
kind of
less.
taking care of each other at this point. Um, and after that happens, the homeboy straight up gets into this tub sized pool. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm assuming your offer wasn't one sided, was it?" And she's like, "But you're getting your clothes all soaked." And he says, "Really don't care."
I
And
mean, rude.
so they go to her side of things. Um, and when all is said and done and he's getting out, just like soaking wet, she smiled at him and he said, your smile, you're beautiful, Sarah.
Oh,
And I think
you are beautiful, Sarah. Love you.
yep, you are beautiful. She says, he took her into the bedroom, cocooned in her towel, and she said, "I lay there in my towel cocoon, covered from my shoulders to my thighs, utterly confused. It wasn't nighttime when he kept me within arm's reach. This was different. Yes, that we had enjoyed each other. Sure, frustration and maybe a little anger had spawned it, but there had been no pretense. What we had shared wasn't a consequence of desire fueled feeding, but I wasn't naive enough to think that it meant the past or the future had suddenly changed. Niktos wanted me then and now. That much was clear. I love that she can admit it. Because some of these women can't be like, "Oh, it's just because he's a man and has wants." She's like, "No, he wants me. I can admit that." Like, I love that.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. And they get into some pillow talk. We love some good old pillow talk. Um, she's being really quiet, and he's basically like, "You're never this quiet." And she says, "Everyone I know would disagree with you." And they get into like her history. Of being his consort and how she was treated like the chosen. Um, no one could talk to her, touch her. And she says, I was veiled, but not veiled, basically. But after, but even after you didn't take me and I no longer wore the veil, it remained the same. The people of Lysania didn't even know that I was the true heir to the throne. They didn't know that Princess Seraphina even existed. And the few who did, like the older servants who worked at Wayfair and had to suspect who I was, they never acknowledged it or me. I was a ghost. And she said, "So I'm actually used to being quiet." He says, "Not with me." Um,
Hmm.
and she says, "That's basically because you annoy me." Um, but she's starting to feel uncomfortable, realizing she talked about this and she's gonna be like, "I should go." And he says, "No, we have a few hours." And he says, you should stay here," basically. And as she's falling asleep, she hears him say, "Sarah, you were never a ghost to me."
Hmm.
And
So touching.
I want to
Melt.
kiss him for that. Yeah. I'm just like,
And
oh.
you just melt.
Insert melting emoji. Um,
Mhm.
And she wakes up to Nectus and Jadis in her room. She's got a lot of deja vu, except this time well, no, she was naked last time too, I think. But she's naked under the blanket. Jadis is asleep on her legs. Nectus is just there smiling because he's Nectus. Um, and
That's so funny.
he's basically saying she sleeps on her legs to make sure he doesn't get up. Um, and he says, "And since she decided to sleep, I figured I'd wait for one of you to wake up." And she says, "Oh," and she zeroes in on his grin. There's something satisfied about it. Uh, and she's like, "This isn't what it looks like." And he's like, "What does it look like?" "Like I'm in his bed because he wanted you there." as did you. Unless that's not what you wanted and he somehow trapped you here completely nude. I love Nectus so much. Oh, so freaking much. And he tells her that Nyctos is at court and she's kind of upset by that. And then she realizes that technically he never agreed to her demands. And she's kind of frustrated about that. But just, I don't think it's that. I think he's just like, she's tired. She's in the calling. I'm a go. But we learn that he's also in Lethe. That's where he's holding court because he wants to be seen there. He wants to have a presence with the people there. And Nectus starts spitting some truth at her. He says, when Ash decided to honor the deal his father made, he didn't want to force any of the responsibilities of being a consort, something he knew you never agreed to, onto you. If he'd learned you were interested, I'm sure he would have volunteered whatever information you wanted to know. Instead, he learned that you never had any intentions of fulfilling that deal either. You had other plans. And it's like, well, asshole. But not
accurate.
An asshole. Yes.
Accurate, but a little blunt, Nectus.
I mean, that Josh Sutton, that tells you everything you need to know. And he's like, even though he understands what drove you and accepts it, why would he think you wanted to know these things when it was just recently that you told him you wanted to be of use? So it's basically like, why you can't get after him for not saying anything when you never said anything. And he thought you didn't want that anyways. Making valid points. And she said, but there's no true way, no way he's truly forgiven me. And he said, I never said he has. I said he understands. And I'll tell you the same thing I told him when he was much younger. Oh, just shows how long he's been in his life. I love it. Forgiveness benefits the forgiver, and it's easy. Understanding is acceptance, and that is far harder. And if Ash didn't understand and accept your past actions, you would not be where you are right now. You would not carry his scent on your body, and I would have never sensed what I did when I found him with you. And she says, what do you sense? And he says, what I sensed before. And the odd little half grin returned. Peace. Ugh.
I love that they don't describe like being in love as like, I mean,
infatuation and the
like it's
obsession.
It's
like you're at home.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway.
Chapter 20.
Chapter 20. So yeah. So Nectus left. She went into her chamber. She's thinking about everything she said. She's thinking about how they haven't spoken. She's just thinking about everything, kind of like about what Nikto said about the peace, about how she hasn't said anything to him. And how she realizes that she needs to talk to him more. And because she's saying that like I never mentioned attending court or being of use. I'd asked about his army and his plans, but that was it. And she said, and God's, now I felt like an ass because before Nyktos had learned the truth, he'd given me space because he hadn't wanted me to feel overwhelmed. It was very likely that he'd been doing the same now, waiting for me to give some sort of indication that I wanted to be an actual consort outside of the bedchamber. Oh. And she continues on to say, talking things out always sounded easy, but the anxiety that the mere idea of it drummed up also seemed insurmountable. And honestly, yes.
What a mood.
Yes. Very much true. She kind of fell asleep again, and Nyktos comes in, and he's worried about her because of how much she's sleeping. He's like, I shouldn't have taken you from earlier. She's like, oh, I didn't mind. And he's like, that's beside the point. I didn't take a lot, but the choline already takes enough of a toll on your body. If you have a headache, let me know. And she comes to realize that they're talking about the marks and how he healed them, and then she says that I'm okay. The bath, it was a surprise, a very nice one, as were other things. And he's like, other things? And she's like, what came after? The talking, what he said as I fell asleep. I couldn't make myself say any of that, though, no matter how hard I tried or how much I wanted to push past the feeling of vulnerability. And she says, you were very good at what you did with that tongue. Yes, let's not be vulnerable. Let's talk about his tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, um, but then she finds out that he brought dinner with her and with him and that he's fulfilling. It shows that he is listening to the demands that she made, or the requests, as she says, and that she wants him to eat with her. Um, they talk about court, and um, they're talking about how the people coming and bringing the small, big issues, whatever. It shows that they're comfortable enough to do so, and that they don't fear him, and they feel safe to come to him, which I think is just like I like that because you could see obviously the difference between him and Colas, because when Colas was death, everyone ran from him and it bothered him and no one liked him. And we can see that Nyktos, even though he understands why the people do that, he also works to make sure his people trust him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sweet. And they kind of talk about her family some more, and she's saying they basically go over how she's used to blaming herself because her family blamed her. And she
Mm-hmm.
stands up for Ezra and says that Ezra never did that. And she said, and he's kind of questioning a little bit, which don't blame him. He met Tavius, he met her mom. Like, how could he know that Ezra's not the same? She's like, do you think she'll rule better? And she says she already has. Ezra's the queen they deserve. Um, and he's like, I expect you to live a long life for me to discover that. And she's like, wait, I can visit her? And he's like, yeah, that's what you want, isn't it? And then he says, we'll go tomorrow, but we cannot linger. And then he kind of goes over the details, saying you have to be um you have to be selective about what you share with her. You know, you can't tell her everything because that puts her into dangerous into danger. But they're gonna go visit Ezra, then the pools of Divanash, because they realize even though it's a risk, it's one they have to take. They have to take the risk. Um, even if he's learned to be overly cautious. Um, Nectus is on board with going there. She's like, I'm relieved. Or no, she's like, he's relieved to hear that he's not trying to control her. And he says, I feared that the situation we're in can make you feel that way. That I've made you feel that way because I've used my authority to stop you from doing what you want. And I don't like it. And she said, there's a difference between someone trying to control you and someone trying to protect you. I know I may
Mm-hmm.
not behave like there's a difference, but I do know there is one.
Oh, we love a self-aware queen.
Yeah, she says there
Well,
just needs to
not
be
queen.
yeah. There just needs to be a balance, when the need to protect what's vulnerable doesn't get in the way of what needs to be done.
Retweet.
Um and then she said, I didn't think how you'd have dinner with me. And he's like, I was under the impression that you didn't believe I would meet any of the demands you made today. And she's like, am I that transparent? And he said, usually you were not, but in this, you're as transparent as a window.
Mood.
Uh, they go back to talking about the Cimmerians and um, how they could have chosen another court to serve, but that he was serving Hanan. And she's like, why? If they're part of Addis's lineage. And he says, Addis is not just the primal of war, he's also the primal of accord. He prefers agreement over discord, so Vathi is mostly peaceful, at least his half is. The Cimmerian can get a bit antsy if there's no blood spilled, so many leave Vathi to serve in other courts. Hanan has a lot of
Mm.
them. And
Banana
we go into
something.
he's a coward, and Nikto says Hanan loves the hunt if he is not equally matched. So yes, he's a coward.
Correct.
Basically, he's a coward. And then she's going back into trying to convince him that he has friends. And she says, denying that you do doesn't change the fact that people care about you, nor does it change that you care for them. It's okay to have friends.
Mm-hmm.
But she says, but I'm sorry you had to kill another, talking about Dorkin. And he says, You're wrong. It's not okay to care for others when it gets them tortured or killed.
Listen, they're
Yeah.
loyal to you, bud. It's okay.
Yeah. She says, Nectus said that you have been able to convince Colas that you're loyal to him. Why does he treat you like this then? Because of your father? And he's like, probably. But honestly, what he's doing to me is not much worse than what he does to anyone else. One way or another, they fall in and out of favor with him as quickly as you go through clean clothes. So Colas is just an ass, basically, to anyone. Correct. It doesn't matter if
Well,
you're
we
in his
already knew
favor or
that.
not. Yeah. we're learning that day by day.
Mhm.
It just gets worse every day, honestly. And they talk about the issues at the pillars. And he says more and more souls are refusing to cross and are entering the dying woods instead. And they're becoming shades, and it gets the ones there that are already there a little bit antsy, and they can get a little bit stirred up. You know, that's fun. It's fun.
Literally says it's not fun.
It's fine, guys. It's fun. He says the moment the souls refuse to cross, the moment the souls refuse to cross and enter the dying woods, they become shades. Nectus believes that that's it for them. They're lost and should be destroyed immediately. And I know I should. None has ever come back from that. But I think, what if one does? What if there should still be a chance for them to either face justice or receive redemption? But once they're destroyed, that's it. There are no more chances.
Look at him having hope, even like when there's no hope to be had.
I know. Like he's saying he's not good and that he doesn't deserve people to care about him, but he cares about the shades of all things in a way. And she says, it's clear that you should be the true primal of life, not because it was your destiny, but because you're good. And he says, that's where you're wrong. I told you before I have one kind, decent bone in my body, Sarah, but I'm not good, and you should do well to remember that.
No.
So sad.
Ugh, and that's where we're gonna end part 2.
Yes.
Because, him not thinking he's good enough. But we will get to part 3 and probably part 4, let's be honest.
Next
ASAP.
week.
Yeah, next week at some point. But thank you guys for listening. Sippin' and bitchin' and all the things. Share with your
Eat your
friends. Do what you gotta
honeydew.
do. Eat your
Have your
honeydew.
tissues ready for the rest of this book.
Honestly. And we'll catch you later, bitches.
Bye.
Bye.